we are very lucky and fortunate to have Jim Shelton continuing leadership on this stuff. Now we're going to get right into the program. And basically, for you all who have the agenda in front of you, we're going to go, come on in, everybody, come on in. Ruth, you get to come up here, though. So Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post, our good friend, is going to moderate the first panel. And just as you guys take a look at the end, why don't the three panelists, Deborah, come on up, and Punya and Daniel, and you want to introduce everybody, Ruth, once they get up here. But we're basically on target pretty well. We're going to have, the lunch session is when we're really going to have a chance for everybody in the room to talk about where we think we are on this stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to the great Ruth Marcus to introduce this panel, which is going to be about preparing teachers. All yours.
I wish you would introduce me as the adequate Ruth Marcus, because then I could exceed expectations, and that would be good. It's all about the baselines, what I've learned in Washington. I'm here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody out there, for being here. I'm here to learn as much as to moderate, because the way I learn about areas is to ask questions. So now I'm just getting to do that in public. I think it's a really, as the parent of two teenage daughters who are actually, I think, sometimes physically attached to their technology and perhaps not physically attached enough to their classroom work, I think it's a fascinating topic of discussion. And I think because you have people's bios in front of you, I think what I'm going to do is ask folks to simultaneously do two things: to introduce themselves, and while they're introducing themselves, say what they think is the greatest challenge facing institutions in the area of teaching teachers and accommodating the magnificent and challenging realities of new technology. So who are you and what are the biggest challenges? And we'll just go this way. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you so much. Let me just start by thanking all of you to invite me, to have invited me here. My name is Punya Mishra. I'm a professor at Michigan State University. Most of my work has been in the area of educational technology. I'm originally from India, have been in the US for a while now. I also have two teenage kids. So in fact, whenever I have a group like this, I always take out my camera and take a picture to show them that somebody actually does listen to me.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
that's a use of technology I could get with.
At a conference, I did that once, where I actually had everybody lie down and sleep. And I took a picture and sent it to them. And the only way they'll see the picture is if I tweet it, that too, right? One of the things that I was very glad about being invited here was the focus on teachers. I think that whenever, or very often, when we talk about educational technology, we tend to focus on the tool, that we put this tool in there and it's going to dramatically change everything. And I look at the whole hype around MOOCs. I look at this project called Hole in the Wall. Those who have gone and actually seen those schools now where this hole in the wall was set up, if they're used at all, it's used by boys, it's used for porn. And so I think those are the kinds of things we have to think about, that the teacher is a crucial mediator between what students need to learn and what these tools and technologies and content and subject matter that we expect students to learn. If it was just a question of having information out there, Google would be enough, but it's not. I think my colleague here, Deb, can speak very much around her research around motivation and the importance of the connection between content and the student that the teacher creates. And I think that, to me, is one of the biggest challenges that we face, is that we have a lot of hype around these tools and we say, oh, let's go and plonk this device in there and it's going to make change happen. I don't think so. My work has focused primarily on the kinds of knowledge that teachers need to have to integrate technology, and hopefully some of the questions later will come into that. I think that teaching fundamentally is it's a humane enterprise. And the more emphasis we have on that crucial person, the teacher, I think the better it will be. Finally, we did some work on sort of research on 21st century learning, where we looked at all these different frameworks. And a big emphasis, whenever people talk of 21st century learning, they talk about the 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication. What we found is that, in fact, the frameworks, if you look at it, 3 main things emerge. One is foundational knowledge. That knowledge of math, of science, of music, or art, whatever the discipline is incredibly important. The students of the future are going to be, computer game designers. They need to know both programming and maybe theater and art. And so foundational knowledge is always going to be important. How we act on that knowledge, that's sort of the meta-knowledge. That's the creativity, the communication, collaboration, all of those pieces come in. And the third piece which emerged, which I thought was really interesting, was what we call humanistic knowledge, a sense of values and perspective about how to live in this global world. And I think there are a lot of complications around that. I'll stop now because I can go on and on forever. That's why I'm a professor and leader
Great,
tomorrow.
Daniel.
Hi, my name is Daniel Soodjinda. Hi, my name is Daniel Soodjinda. I'm an assistant professor at CSU Stanislaus in California, where in liberal studies and teacher education, where I train future elementary school teachers. So I think that one of the biggest challenges that teachers face is really just a lack of overall training in how to really integrate technology into the classroom. And I think that lack of training stems from the courses that these teachers took when they were in their credential programs. Because many of them were in credential programs that had faculty who, A, didn't model the usage of technology in the lessons that they taught to their students, B, faculty who kind of just didn't know how to talk about technology and how to effectively integrate it beyond the superficial discussion of, use PowerPoint or use YouTube, or Google just to search for something. But C, I think that comes from institutions that don't necessarily support or provide incentives for faculty so that they can actually learn these technologies. So what you end up happening are teachers who are told that they really need to integrate technology. So like the new Common Core standards talk about the need to integrate technology in all these lessons. And colleges of education give a lot of professional development to faculty around the Common Core, so that faculty are now telling their students, you really need to include technology in your lessons. And school districts are telling teachers, you really need to include technology in your lessons. But when it comes down to it, no one really shows these teachers how to do it. No one's really training them. So there's a disconnect.
Can I interrupt you and ask a really foundational question? And
Sure.
Deborah, I know you sent some magnificent thoughts on this prior to the panel, so I don't want to cut you off. But I'm just really tempted to ask a foundational question, which is, and this might be heretical, but should we be focusing that much on technology? In other words, this emphasis that you talk about, that schools are telling teachers you need to use technology, and school districts are telling teachers you need to use technology. And I don't mean to direct this just to you, Daniel, so everybody else should jump in too, and then we're going to move back to Deborah and the major challenge question. But shouldn't we be asking why? So we know the answer to that question before we know how it should be used?
I think that students already live in multimedia worlds, so they consume multimedia experiences through, their smartphones, through the internet, through videos that they watch, through everything. So it's something that students already know how to do, and I think that students just don't know how to actively engage with it for learning experiences. So I do think it's something that needs to be discussed and taught, and I think it's important, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Please.
Deb, is it okay?
Yeah, and then we're going to give Deborah like a whole uninterrupted stretch.
There you go. I think for me, I think the point that was raised that our children today live in this world of technology, I think is a very important one. But I think for me, even more important is the fact that if you look at any field of human activity, it has been dramatically changed because of technology. So the goal is not to learn the technology. The goal is to become a better physicist, a better mathematician, a better scientist, a better musician. Think of any domain. The world of music dramatically changed because of technology. Journalism, changing still. Education,
We
higher
don't
ed.
need to get depressed about that right now. A little too early in the morning.
Okay. But the point is that that's the nature of the discipline and the fields that we work in. And to me, I have a friend who studies black hole dynamics. I don't think he has ever looked through a telescope in 15 years. He buys time off Hubble or some other telescope. He gets reams of data, and he sits at his computer and he creates his computer simulations. Fascinating stuff about black hole dynamics and all that. But is he a programmer? Is he a physicist? What is he? And I think that if you look at musicians, I mean, look at any form of human activity today. And if we want our students to be productive citizens, and I mean that they are more than, tech workers, we have to think about integrating technology because that's the way authentic work is done today.
So Deborah, I think 3 questions come to you. Who are you? What are the biggest challenges facing teachers of teachers in the area of technology, and why does integrating technology matter? So those are one really easy question and 2 big ones.
I'm Deborah Stipek, and I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford. So I'll start with the first question, which is the biggest challenge. I want to make one point, and that is that technology does not make teaching easier. It makes it more complex. I think for a while we thought somehow technology would mean that teachers could sit in the back of the classroom and read the newspaper, and that's clearly not true. It provides, well, I'm going to quote my colleague Linda Darling-Hammond, who has quoted many other people. I don't really know the origins of this statement, but you've probably heard it. The new mission of schools is to prepare students for problems that have not yet been identified, using technologies that have not yet been invented. We can't just train teachers to use a particular set of technologies because 5 years into their teaching, those technologies may be no longer cutting edge. There will be a whole new set of technologies that will be available to them. And that means that we need to teach teachers to be flexible and innovative, just as they need to be able to teach their children to be flexible and innovative, because the world is changing, the technology is changing at such a rapid pace. We can no longer teach stuff. We've been teaching children stuff that, 1, they forget, and 2, becomes no longer relevant with the changing world, and we can't teach teachers stuff or specific kinds of skills. We need to teach them to be innovative and flexible and problem solvers. That makes preparing teachers extraordinarily complex and different from the way we have done it for decades. So that's the point, my main point that I want to leave with you on. Do we need to teach them to use technology tools? Yes, for all of the reasons that have been given, but also it's an opportunity. It is a tool that can be used to increase the power of education in ways that are almost beyond my imagination, perhaps not your imagination, but the opportunities for more individualized instruction, for simulations and adaptive and active learning are really quite extraordinary. So not to help teachers, prepare them to use these new tools productively, I think would really be a serious shame.
So how are we doing on that? And I'm just going to, rather than go down rows, I'm just going to open it up and let you guys both jump in and have a conversation among yourselves. Our students are doing fantastically, as we were saying, at leaping on whatever the latest technology is. My kids tell me about what apps I should be looking at, or in their case, maybe not looking at, well before I read about it in, say, newspapers, not to criticize newspapers in any way. But how are teachers of education doing at keeping up with the students they have and the students those students will be teaching in terms of integrating teaching about technology into their pedagogical experience? Who wants to take the first crack at that?
Daniel started to answer that, which is not very well, as far as I know. I've not visited all teacher training colleges, but I think that Daniel's point is really well taken, that you have faculty who may have been teaching for 10, 15, 20 years who are not necessarily adept at all the new technologies. And frankly, yes, you can move the cat food, but I don't know about the faculty at these guys' institutions, but I can only influence my faculty so much. And so what I've found is we need new models. I do believe that technology needs, the teaching of technology to teachers needs to be deeply embedded in the methods courses, in the teaching of disciplines, in teaching of history, of teaching of science, and teaching of math, because you use technology differently in those subject matters. And you're really training teachers to think about what is the learning goal, and then what are the huge array of options that I have available in technology to be able to promote that learning goal more effectively. So the strategy that we're using at Stanford is actually to bring up some of the younger folks who are totally adept and confident and competent in using these new technologies, and pairing them with some of our more senior faculty, I don't want to say older, more senior advanced faculty, so that in our methods courses, in whatever discipline it is, there is someone whose responsibility it is to really understand all the potential uses of technology and to weave that in to the methods courses and the teacher students' experiences in their classrooms.
But Deborah, how do you accommodate that really sensible approach with the other really important point that you made about how we're teaching students to handle and incorporate technologies that we don't yet know what they will be, and the existing technologies may well be obsolete within a nanosecond or two. So it seems like a tension between those two things.
Not really, because everything you're teaching you're preparing teachers to be flexible problem solvers, whether there's technology or not. They are facing new demographics. You know, I mean, there are many teachers who were trained 10 years ago have a group of students who are English language learners now, which they weren't originally prepared to teach. So any good effective teacher preparation program is really training people to be flexible thinkers and problem solvers, to look at their students and their learning goals and think about how best do I meet those needs. So technology just broadens, I think, the toolkit that they have available.
Punya, Daniel, on the fundamental question of how are we doing?
Yeah, so I want to give you an example that I think kind of exemplifies this and maybe answers that question really well, is the issues that LA Unified had, Los Angeles Unified School District had when they tried to integrate their iPad program, where they spent all this money giving iPads to schools, thinking that it was going to be this wonderful solution and teachers were going to use them in all the classrooms, and come to find out that only 10% of the teachers who actually had the iPads were actually using them effectively or using them at all, due to issues such as, you know, a lack of internet, a strong internet that was at something so basic that didn't exist, and also just teachers not knowing how to use the curriculum that was on the iPad in conjunction with classroom management strategies that they kind of understood, but not in terms of how to use these classroom management strategies with an iPad, right? So teachers understand classroom management strategies. They're taught this in their methods courses and in other courses that they take in credential programs, but there is no framework really about where technology fits into those strategies yet, because it exists to some extent, but not, you know, through some of the things that you've talked about and written about, but it's not discussed enough. And so these teachers really want to. I really think that they want to, but it's just that they get, when they try it out, right? I imagine that in LA Unified, when they tried using the iPads first, they had some issues with classroom management, with students not using the iPads appropriately, and then they immediately start blaming the students. And I would say there are some articles written that kind of blame the students, which say, oh, well, the students are just, you know, they don't, they just want to fool around. And then they start blaming the teachers, as opposed to the fact that teachers just weren't trained. There weren't a lot of professional development around how to use the iPads effectively. So I do think they want to, but I just don't think they're yet
And how
prepared.
are our schools of education doing it, teaching them how to do that?
Well, I think that, well, for example, in the CSU, there's this program called the Digital Ambassadors Program, which is sponsored by the Chancellor's Office and is really geared towards creating a professional learning community among teacher ed faculty who are interested in ed tech, right? So the Chancellor's Office sponsors this professional learning community, and we get together every month and we talk about some of the challenges that we face at our individual CSUs relating to teaching these things to our students and some of the things that our faculty face, some of the challenges they face. And we talk through these challenges and we share ideas, and then we go back to our home institutions, and then we create professional development programs and other types of programs for student teachers and such that can address some of those things. But I think that professional learning communities among faculty who are interested is one solution, as are others that I think my colleagues can talk about.
Punya.
Oh, go ahead.
I have to say, I think it's the wrong question. We say, how are teachers doing? How are schools doing? How are schools of education doing? That's not the question. The question is, how can we do better? What do we need as a society to do to make sure that teachers are doing better, that schools of education are doing better? I mean, just to have a kind of up or down ranking of, or rating of how well schools are doing, we know that they can do better. So the real question is how.
Okay, take the better question.
I think the points that were made here, and I'm just going to sort of elaborate on that a little bit. I think that the biggest thing, the problem that I see in most teacher professional development, teacher education, is the standalone course on technology. Come in for 2 days and we will give you this workshop on how to use wikis, right? I'm a 5th grade maths teacher. I have no clue what a wiki is for. Why am I motivated to come there? So then you have all these things, we'll give donuts and have coffee there, so you'll show up for that, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge. I think what we need to be thinking about is what I'd like to call deep integration, where you are engaging with problems of practice which may or may not have a digital solution. And I think one of the biggest things we need to understand is that technology, a textbook is a technology. It doesn't grow on a tree. It's not a natural thing like air or water, right? Even the air and water we have nowadays, I think, is pretty designed, if you think about that, right? So what we want, as Deb so rightfully said, is creative, flexible thinkers about content, about pedagogy, because your classrooms are changing, the contexts are changing, about technology. And I think one of the things that we have worked on at Michigan State is offer this framework called the Tipet Framework, which argues that teacher knowledge needs to be integrated between technology, pedagogy, and content. And that there needs to be sort of deep integration with the actual lived practice of teachers. So as an example, we have this project in Chicago that we are working on right now with teachers in Chicago public schools. It's funded by an IT company, which is a great example of sort of public-private partnership. And what we are doing there is working both face-to-face with the teachers as well as offering them support through the year. It's not a one-shot deal that you come in, do a workshop, and go away. We are committed to those people, and they are committed to their students. And the kinds of work that's happening out of that is just phenomenal. So I think it's that deep integration, and it's not taking teaching to be something that you can throw at technology or throw one idea out there. There are going to be lots of good ideas. So I have a sort of a beef against this idea of best practice. So I think what I'd like is pretty good practice. Because what's going to work for me is not going to necessarily work for you. But you're going to take that idea and you're going to make it your own. Teachers need to become what we call designers of curriculum rather than users of curriculum. And I think that's a really important distinction in terms of empowering them to be that flexible, creative thinker that we want them to be.
So on the question of creative designer, being curriculum designers, when we think about talking to teachers, and I think that your point about not having it be a standalone donut-driven model, but something that is integrated. What are we really talking about in talking to new and developing teachers about integrating technology? Are we talking to them about building a better textbook? I mean, I love the notion that the textbook is, in fact, a piece of technology. Are we talking about better ways of delivering existing information or helping more than delivering information, because learning stuff is, I think, a little bit overrated as somebody who can't remember any of the stuff she supposedly learned. Building better thinkers. Are we talking about teaching teachers to think about classrooms in fundamentally transformed ways due to technology, with more individualized, more creative use of technology in having students kind of do their own instruction, watch a YouTube Khan Academy video, come back to the teacher for a little bit of brush up on things that he or she didn't understand with that? Or are we talking about just sort of fine-tuning and maybe attracting kids, because they all use technology, to pay more attention to the stuff that they could also get from a textbook? Or, as I suspect the answer is, are we talking about both?
I kind of think that we should.
Or if I once again asked the wrong question, feel free.
I think that we should be, perhaps, I think, if I understand the question right, talking about both. So I think that we should be talking about how teachers, talking to teachers about how they can effectively integrate technology so that it's not, so that the way that in which they teach isn't like this where students are like consuming the technology and instead of engaging or creating the type of technology. They're not like, in other words, instead of, like, I think there was a report done from Lynn Darling-Hammond recently about at-risk students and like the way in which technology can best support them and the way in which teachers can best support them using technology. And one of the things that was written in the report done by Linda Darling-Hammond said that oftentimes these at-risk students, when they use technology, they're kind of just consuming technology that is, the teacher just basically translated a workbook and put it on a laptop, and students are just kind of doing this rote learning through the technology. But that's really not what teachers need to necessarily do, right? They need to actually be engaged with the technology and perhaps even be part of that technology creation through like digital storyboarding, for example, the creation of websites, understanding how to program. These are things that I think we should be talking to teachers about instead of that superficial discussion of technology that might be existing right now.
Deborah.
I want to use this as an opportunity to raise what I think is one of the, thank you.
You might have to switch
Not to-
this
You
one.
can
Yeah,
just
this
leave
one-
that on.
This
We're-
one's on. This one's on. Yeah.
To raise an issue that I really want to make sure is on the table, which is the ways in which technology is creating greater inequality among students' opportunities to learn. We usually talk about the infrastructure, like the availability of computers and how many children per computer and that sort of thing, or the wiring of the schools. But probably as important and possibly even more important is the way it's used in classrooms. And in fact, some recent research suggests that this was a very large-scale study looking at NAEP, National Assessment data, where the more students in schools serving high numbers of low-income kids use technology, the lower their achievement scores. Whereas in schools serving more middle and more affluent kids, the more they use technology, the higher their achievement test scores. When they dove in and looked at the way it was being used in the schools serving higher proportions of low-income kids, they were using it essentially as sort of technologized workbooks. Whereas, and it's not just creating, but it's also for purposes of simulation, games, data analysis. There are all kinds of ways of using technology which are much more active learning and processing, in addition to actually creating something new. And that's what was being used more in the schools serving middle income and more affluent kids. And so we really have to pay very, very strong attention to making sure that teachers who are being prepared to teach in schools serving low-income kids learn those more active, adaptive strategies, because most of the research suggests that the more workbook type technology delivered instruction is not productive, but that the other more adaptive, interactive strategies do enhance learning. So let's use technology in a way that's going to enhance learning in all schools, not just schools for more affluent kids.
Can I just add?
Please.
Thank you so much for bringing up.
Here.
Not work now. All right, thank you. Thank you, Deb, for bringing that issue of digital equity up. I want to bring up another can of worms, open up another can of worms, which is that of assessment. And I think that as long as we do not come up with better ways of assessing learning and student progress, we won't see much progress. So there is always this complaint that teachers, they're teaching to the test. I have no problem with teaching to the test. What's wrong with teaching to the test? What else would you teach to? How else would you know whether you're succeeding or not? The problems are the tests. Do we have good assessments of student understanding and student learning? That's the question I think that's important for us to think about. And I think that until we think of better ways of assessing and evaluating learning, we will not see much progress, because that's what's going to drive the kinds of actions. In my work in CPS, it has been an eye-opener. I mean, even though I've been in education for so many years, to work in a large urban school district and see the constraints and pressures that these individual teachers work under, it's staggering to think about, and a large part driven by larger sort of moves that are happening nationally. But I think that's an important thing that we need to be concerned about as well.
What else, on that score, both the issues of income inequality score and the issues of research, and so I'm glad both of you sort of anticipated some areas I really wanted to delve into. What more do schools of education need to be doing to figure out how to make sure that the technology that we're all figuring out how to use and integrate is in fact being used effectively, and particularly how to figure out whether we're using it effectively for the children who need it the most. And Deborah, you mentioned one study that I thought was really interesting, but elaborate a little bit on what you think the research agenda needs to be going forward.
We have a fair amount of research now, and it's continuing, and I don't think we have to worry too much about it continuing on what kinds of learning experiences using technology are most productive for children. What we have almost no knowledge about, and where we really need to put some research in, is in that human capital issue, is how do you effectively not just prepare teachers to use it productively, but also support them in using it productively in their schools. Here, I think you run into issues not just of what the teacher knows, but how the school is organized. And so I would expand the research question not just to what do teachers need to know, but how do schools need to be organized to support teachers to use technology effectively. I can guess one answer to that is that they need more time. The U.S. right now provides teachers with about the least number of minutes outside of their classrooms of any industrialized country. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why we don't do as well as most other industrialized countries, because to prepare to be effective teachers, you need time out of the classroom to prepare your lessons, to look at the various technologies that might be available for that lesson, because what you learned 8 years ago in your teacher education program may no longer even be available, to work with colleagues, to look at some of those, access some of those materials that are available now online for teachers. That takes time. So as long as we organize teachers' jobs so that they spend all of their time with kids and almost no time out of the classroom, that's why we get the scripted workbook type teaching, because teachers don't have the time or the support to actually engage in the homework that they need to do to use technology more productively. So I'd like to see research more on not just teaching teachers how do you do that, but how do you organize schools in ways that allow them to use technology effectively.
Daniel?
So I think that Mishra's done a good job with the Tipet model in talking about how, and doing some research around how technological, pedagogical content knowledge, that is the combination of technology, pedagogy, and content, needs to be thought of as this trifecta, this combination of three things, right, to effectively integrate technology into classrooms. But kind of building on this issue of inequity or inequality and underserved student populations, I think it's also important to start thinking about other forms of pedagogy that are in the discourse, like related to critical pedagogy and culturally relevant pedagogy. And so that now you were starting to think about, well, okay, how do we now support these underserved student populations? How do we think about technology and how it can inform this movement towards thinking of pedagogy to support like more activist-y, social justice-y approaches towards education? Like that all needs to happen too in order to support these underserved student populations. And I don't think we're there yet because we're still trying to figure out how to integrate it with pedagogy and content knowledge. But eventually I think it does need to go there. And I think that the scholars who study critical pedagogy and culturally relevant pedagogy, it would be interesting if they started exploring that in combination with technology.
Punya, did you have something you wanted to add?
Just briefly, I think that one of the things that is really funny to me, like, that we criticized our own work, and that the Tipet Framework, at some level, is neutral with respect to the goals of education. And I think that's been part of sort of the work, I think that's really essential now, is exactly the kind of thing that you talked about, that we need to start thinking about what are the purposes and goals for education, and then this becomes a tool in that direction. And I think that when coming back to teachers, one of the things I think we need to think about is, we've talked about people using technology. Clearly, that doesn't work. I mean, it goes back to Larry Cuban's work to show that you might be using technology, but you don't use it in the classroom. A lot of emphasis has now been on integrating. And I think that what's sort of critical is sort of thinking about in terms of innovating with technology. And so we sort of have these three layers where you can talk about sort of mechanical use of technology, meaningful, and finally generative. And I think that's sort of the goal of where the teacher becomes this creative, flexible thinker, because the tools are going to change. I mean, that's going to be just one thing that's a given, is that you learned with X and it's not going to be X. What it's going to be, I can't predict. I couldn't have predicted this thing called Twitter. I mean, why would you send just 140 characters? Where did that come from? But, that's what it is. It's what it is. And now you deal with it, right? I mean, and I think that's part of sort of the approach that we bring in to thinking about technology and content and pedagogy, that it's this flexibility that you want to have in integrating that.
I just want to go back and try to re-ask the question that I don't think got fully elaborated on, about as we think about the classroom and as we think about teaching teachers to integrate technology into the classroom, whether we're talking about sort of, the modern version of the overhead slide projector or whatever the really cool thing was supposed to be that my teachers were using, and I think I won't identify the decade, or whether we're really fundamentally reimagining the classroom in a way that my grandchildren's classroom, my future grandchildren's classroom, will look different than, way different from my classroom in a way that my classroom did not look different from my parents' classroom, overhead projector technology notwithstanding. I don't know if I made that clear. In other words, how transformed by technology are our classrooms going to be, and therefore how transformed by technology is our pedagogy on teaching going to be?
I think that first off, the most important aspect of the classroom, which is the teacher, will never go away, because you still always will need the teacher there, but it's the tools in which the teacher uses to teach the content and the tools that students use to learn the content that will transform. And sure, that's just my short response. I just think that.
But we do hear a lot of the talk about flipping the classroom, right? So.
But even with the flipped classroom, the flipped classroom still needs coaching and mentorship from a human, in order for it to be effective, right? And you need that there, because if you don't have that, then what you have is you have students who don't know how to use the technology effectively so that they can use whatever concept it is that the teacher's trying to have them learn from the technology. right?
If I can jump on that, I think it goes beyond just knowing how to use the technology. I mean, one of the best high school science teacher my son had spent a week teaching them how to read a textbook. It's amazing. I mean, that they reached high school. He was a freshman in high school, and he technically didn't know how to read a textbook. Learning to read a mathematical proof. I remember this conversation with my daughter. She was reading it as if she reads a short story. Reading a mathematical proof needs you to read the premises, go back to the end, see the conclusion, then and only then will the steps in between, why do I divide by c squared, is going to make sense. It's a goal-driven kind of an enterprise. So, I mean, there's a lot more to teaching and learning, I think, than just the tools and technologies. Coming back to your question, there is this sort of idea that we have that, different technologies replace the previous ones. But radio hasn't gone away. Film hasn't gone away. So I think that the classroom of tomorrow will use and mix and match of different tools and technology. There are things, if I want to brainstorm, a whiteboard is much better than any mind mapping software out there on the web. I've tried it, trust me. So it depends. Sticky notes are wonderful devices. They're a wonderful technology. Sticky notes are a wonderful technology. Whatever sticky note you can put on your laptop computer, right? So I think the classroom of the future is going to be one where all of these, where a teacher is intelligent or knowledgeable enough to be able to say, for this purpose I need this, for this purpose I need that, and be able to pick and choose. That's the teacher we want. I think this idea that, our classrooms are going to become X or Y misses the point.
Deborah, anything to add?
Well, no, I mean, I think we are at the cusp of something totally transformative. But I mean, the options now and the possibilities are really just quite extraordinary. They make my head hurt just thinking about all of the things that a teacher can do and all the ways we can teach and how the ways we can organize schooling. So it is. But I also agree with these guys that human relationship is critically important. There may be a small number of children out there who really are so self-disciplined or have parents who are making those connections that they can do it on their own. But most kids need that human connection and support and encouragement, and that's not going to go away.
Great. I think at this point what we'd like to do is open it up to questions from the audience. So please step up to the plate so the moderator isn't sitting here open-mouthed. Thank you.
Sure thing. Doug Levin, State Educational Technology Directors Association. I actually have a slightly different takeaway from the NAEP studies on writing. And my strong takeaway is that there's a clear and very direct relationship between students' performance in writing and teachers teaching the academic skill of writing using technology. So I would concur that simply access to technology is not sufficient, or even use. It is how technology is used by the teacher for academic content aligned to what schools and students are expected to know and be able to do. So my question is sort of what are the, are we doing enough, and what are the ways from a pre-service perspective that we can do a much better job of ensuring the teaching of content and through better tools is really the focus of that work that is being done to train teachers.
So, can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that in talking about writing specifically, right? So the way that writing can be improved through technology is through these feedback loops that can happen with technology, right? So that you no longer have to use, say, like track changes in Microsoft Word to give feedback to your students or to edit a paper. You can now do something in real time using Google Docs, right? So if you now, let's start thinking about Google Docs. Okay, so Google Docs can transform the way in which we teach writing, especially with this one-on-one approach that a lot of schools have adopted, right? But in order for teachers to effectively be fluent in Google Docs and all of the power that can come with collaboration and real-time feedback, say something as simple as using the comments feature in Google Docs, they have to be fluent in it, and they have to know how to use it, and they have to have tried it out, right? And I don't know if that's happening in students when they go through their undergraduate programs and then when they get into the credential programs. In other words, I don't know if the faculty are modeling that because Google Docs is still a little bit relatively new in how it's being used in even college classrooms. So if undergraduates, if it started at the undergraduate level, right now at least, so that future teacher candidates like become more fluent in understanding how technology can improve their own writing, then they're more likely to use that when they become teachers and teaching that specific, using that specific type of technology and understanding the power of it when they do teach writing. That's what I think.
I just want to point out how much time that takes for a teacher. So yes, Google Docs and those kinds of tools are absolutely incredible. It's a wonderful example of ways to promote writing skills in students, but it means being on the Google Doc and spending time going through students' writings. The NAEP study, with the classrooms in which writing was using technology primarily for grammar and punctuation actually undermine or slow down the skill development of students. So the effective use is a very time-consuming use.
Hi, I'm Hillary Goldman with the International Society for Technology and Education. And I'm just going back to the colleges of education to understand sort of the evolution and the culture, what's happening. I know in the K-12 community, talking about senior faculty, senior teachers, there are many senior teachers who are reinvigorated when they're exposed to technology. It's not that they're all scared off and are just waiting to retire. They're really reinvigorated. We see teachers throughout their career spectrum, they're integrating technology in the classroom, and then parents are voting because they all want their kids in the class where the teacher's using technology. So I'm just curious, comparing that, we often hear colleges of education, oh, they're so behind, they're not doing, but do you see any of those kinds of pockets? And I know, again, within K-12, what I just described is we want to make that more systematic, but do you see those initial kind of grassroots things? Are teacher education students wanting to go to the professor's class who's integrating the technology better? Is there this excitement in pockets?
I think that's a dean question. What do you think?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, there's just cool stuff, as we saw, cool stuff going on all over the place. But that doesn't necessarily develop a knowledge base, and we don't necessarily get it going to scale. And I think the challenge for all of us is how do we take these pockets of innovation and cool stuff and take advantage of that eagerness and enthusiasm of both some of the older, not all of them, but some of the more senior faculty and the teacher candidates, and do that at scale. So that's the big issue. And how do we learn from these pockets what works and what doesn't work so that we're actually building a knowledge base rather than all of us kind of flying, by our pants?
If I can just add to something that Deb had mentioned before, where she talked about that we need to start thinking beyond sort of just individual teachers to organizations. And I think colleges of teacher education have to sort of contend with that as well. When you're looking at these tools and technologies which are changing at such a fast pace, they fall apart, part of digitality is breakdown. Clearly there are going to be more opportunities to fail right at the beginning, right? And so as organizations, we need to be more comfortable with that. We need to be more, K-12 teachers and K-12 schools need to be more comfortable with that a teacher is going to go and try something with blogging and that with the students, and it may not be the most successful thing the first time around. And I think the same thing for colleges of teacher education as well, that, we think that we are good at what we are doing, but I think we have to be willing to be more risk-taking, and that's sort of something that requires an organization which is accepting of that. And I think I think that's a big challenge right now.
So I'm going to use a moderator's or the MC privilege here to say that we're going to move on a little, but I actually want to ask a last question, because I know we're going to have panels all day. This is such a great panel. And we will figure out the microphones or not. I'm really not concerned about the red light. I have a question, though, that I bet is on a lot of people's mind, which is this. because everything changes now so quickly, Deborah, I asked you this not just because you're my Stanford colleague, but because this is a dean question, but I think it's for all three of you guys. And Ruth, you should answer it. You should answer it too as a mom. Does this mean we're going to have to constantly train teachers on an ongoing basis much more than we do? I mean, my sense is that, people go to the Ed school and they get their certificate, or they're at CSU Stanislaus with you, Daniel, and then they get their training and that's it. So are we looking at an ongoing, much greater investment year after year after year in retraining teachers, and obviously more time, Deborah? But how are we going to do this as schools of ed? That's the final question, and then we're going to stay on track, take about a 5-minute break, and move to the next panel. But I think all of you, including you, Ruth, ought to answer that question.
We don't just do it in schools of ed. I think schools of ed needs to be partners and involved in it. But basically, I don't think we need to do more ongoing support for teachers, whether we use technology or not. That we're way too pathetic in how much we support teachers in their own learning. In fact, when I talk to parents and they say, tell me what I should look for in a school, I say, don't look at what the children are learning, look what the adults are learning, because if the adults are not learning, then it's probably not a very good school. So I don't think technology changes that. It might make it more intense, it might be more to learn, but it doesn't change it. And it means fundamentally changing the way we organize schools and their connection to colleges of education and other sources of expertise of what's going on and what's new.
I think in trying to keep up with all of the new technologies that are coming out and constantly changing, I think that schools of ed, if schools of ed concentrated on training teacher candidates to be open, reflective, and resilient with technology, I think that that's a really, really great start, because then when we get to those issues where teachers are trying to teach a lesson and it fails, for whatever reason, they're trying to do a blogging thing and it fails, or Google Docs and it fails, teachers don't just give up, right? They open up to the idea that maybe there was just some aspect of it they didn't understand, and they go back and they reflect on it, think how they can improve that particular lesson, or be resilient and reflective in knowing what other tools exist or what new tools might be coming out, so that that lesson that they had in their head that they really wanted to teach can actually work. So it's being resilient, I think, is an important factor when it comes to technology, because we all learned how to use our iPhones. We learned how to use it better by the mistakes that we made, and then we learned how to do reflecting on it. So that needs to happen.
But teachers are not going to be resilient if they are in a school culture where you're dinged if you fail. They have to be in a school culture that promotes innovation and says, sometimes it's not going to work, and I'm going to support you in trying to figure out how to make it work better.
In this project that we are doing in Chicago, I was 2 weeks in Chicago working with this fantastic group of teachers, and we were coming up with a slogan for our T-shirt, and one of the slogans that sort of caught the attention of everybody was, failure is the only option. And it sort of sounds counterproductive or weird in some way, but actually it says that unless you have pushed far enough that you have failed, you don't know that you have pushed far enough. And it's what you do after that. It's the resilience and so on. I think that becomes the important thing. And coming back to the question, I don't think that's true just for teachers. That's true now for every profession on the planet. I think that you have to be continuously learning. And so I think that's just a given, and I think that the sort of partnerships of colleges with school districts, with other organizations like the ones here, I think is really the way forward, because it is going to be an ongoing thing. It's not going to be a one-shot deal.
I've learned you can only have a certain number on at once. That's the key. So I think I'm going to just answer this really quickly, because I am so much the unintended Luddite on the panel that when you talk about being fluent in Google Docs, I don't even know what that means. I think I'm really advanced when I know how to track the changes in my Word document. I think just briefly as a parent, I have a little bit of skepticism of technology in this sense, which is I think good teachers are good teachers, and I worry that bad teachers have this reliance on technology as a way to, can have a reliance on technology as a way to sort of distract from their bad teaching. So there's a little bit too much, let's watch a movie. There's a little bit too much. I'm somebody who is morally opposed in a deep way to the use of PowerPoint in any form. I wrote a column once about how PowerPoint caused the space shuttle to crash. So I think that to the extent that we're using technology simply to put things on the board that we could be giving in our lectures, probably we shouldn't be lecturing, we should be more interactive. So I'm not opposed to technology. I think technology can be great and really interactive and engage students, but I really worry about the use of technology as a crutch for bad teaching rather than a kind of inspiration for better teaching. So I'll just end on that note. Thank you so much. Thank you for a great panel.
Thank you.